Good morning. Thank you very much, Jeremy, and greetings to Thijs van Zyl. I must confess that I was approached to make that grand entrance with the Maserati. But because of the scrutiny subjected to the relationship between politicians and cars, I opted to let it pass. Robert Arendse, the CEO of Cape Media, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this important occasion, engagement on leadership. I'm a bit fluish, and I've had my flu medication, so if there's any mishap, just remember it's the alcohol content in the flu medication. It gives me a great pleasure to address you this morning at the Tomorrow's Leaders Convention 2017. I've been asked to speak about a very difficult theme today, which is the subject of leadership. And you may look at me by virtue of the position I occupy, and you may conclude that I'm a leader. But the subject of leadership is difficult because I too am learning continuously, and that leadership in itself is an evolving subject. It is sometimes impulsive, sometimes we lead by chance, sometimes we get into autopilot, but at times we do that which is required by the moment and challenges that we are confronted with. We're reminded by the character Louis Rothschild, a presidential aide in the movie The American President, when he said, and I quote, "People want leadership, and in the absence of genuine leadership, they listen to anyone who steps up to the microphone. They want leadership. They're so thirsty for it, they'll crawl through the desert towards a mirage. And when they discover there's no water, they'll drink the sand," close quote. The hunger and thirst for leadership to be leaders is in all of us. But what kind of leadership do we want? And what kind of leaders do we want to be? The passing away of Comrade Ahmed Kathrada Wamkethi reminds us of sacrificial leadership. Uncle Kathy started his political work at the tender age of 12 when he distributed leaflets at street corners for the Young Communist League. His involvement in the people's struggle, such as the Defiance Campaign and others, led to his house arrest, banning orders, and ultimate imprisonment in Robben Island. Uncle Kathy sacrificed much to be a leader of the people. Uncle Kathy inspired us by his willingness to stand for justice for all people in spite of the personal cost. He showed us that what a moral leader looks like. We will never forget him. Corruption in both the public and private sectors has seen our citizens yearn for honest and ethical leadership. Our people want leaders that they can trust and depend upon to act ethically in all situations. This applies not only to government, but to the private sector as well, and to civic and religious organizations. As South Africa recently hosted the Global Entrepreneurship Conference, we were reminded that entrepreneurial leadership is needed in our society today. And entrepreneurial leadership is characterized by ingenuity, risk-taking, thinking outside of the box, and most importantly, innovation. We are bombarded daily with the 7 habits of this and that character of leaders, or the 5 leadership traits of this and that leader, or the 3 leadership characters or of the other. As we crawl through the desert, bombarded by books, articles, sometimes even tweets and reports on leadership, we externalize the subject and look up to others to lead us. We want to see all these traits, characteristics, qualities, and habits in others out there. And we forget the leader inside of us, and we want to be judgmental on others. We want to externalize leadership to the other instead of stepping up ourselves and take responsibility. We abdicate our responsibility, as I say, by outsourcing leadership. And how many times have we heard about this or that leaders having failed us? How many times have we personally been disappointed either by our supervisor, our manager, our CEO, our member of parliament, or our president, or our ministers and deputy ministers, or owners of companies and so forth, instead of looking at ourselves as the leader who should have stepped into the shoes and took responsibility and took up action on the situations that we're confronted with. Nelson Mandela reminded us when he said that, I quote, "I am not a liberator. The people are their own liberators," close quote. The significance of this lies in the fact that young people in particular should not socially construct heroes, but find those heroes within themselves. To identify an external human being or institution as a hero, as an agent to champion your vision, your goals, and your life aspiration is to disempower yourself and kill the innate leader within yourself. The nation was extensively consulted when we developed the National Development Plan 2030. Our citizens, in no uncertain terms, told us that they envision a South Africa where everyone feels free yet bounded by others. They envision a South Africa where everyone embraces their full potential. They envision a country where opportunity is determined not by birth, but by our ability, education, and hard work. And that they realize that such a society will require transformation of the economy and focused efforts to build the country's capabilities. Our National Development Plan 2030 calls for an effective citizenry. It calls for citizens like you and me to be engaged in their communities. It calls for citizens to raise their voices. It calls for citizens to build together. It also calls for citizens to be active partners in our country's development. Without this active partnership, the process of empowerment will be incomplete. But we cannot be this active citizenry if we're looking for the hero outside, the voice outside, or the leader outside. When we outsource our voice, our leadership, and our citizenry, we become inactive and disempower ourselves in the process. The desert becomes longer and harsher. Water becomes more scarce, and before we know it, the sand becomes a viable option to water. I'm aware that this convention, in addition of its leadership theme, has a strong entrepreneurship theme. In fact, many of you seated here today are entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs. In addressing the high level of youth unemployment and the need for economic growth, we need innovative youth entrepreneurs and youth cooperatives. We need fresh ideas that must propel young people to find a niche in the economy and transform it. The levels of entrepreneurship uptake among South African youth are still far too low when you compare ourselves to our BRICS counterparts and other middle-income developing countries. Young people have to be creators of jobs and not only seekers of jobs. How do we stimulate entrepreneurship as one of the solutions to tackle youth unemployment? In order to stimulate youth entrepreneurship, are we clear about what this ecosystem looks like? Is it adequate and efficient? We must think about youth entrepreneurship through a continuum approach. At one end of the continuum, we have unskilled, undereducated, and unemployed young people. They want to engage in some meaningful economic activity. They may or may not advance along the entrepreneurship continuum. At the other end of this continuum, we have successful young entrepreneurs who are making a profit, employing others, paying taxes, and growing their businesses and the economy. If we are to stimulate youth entrepreneurship along the continuum, we have to think, we have to plan and align our support to this aspirant, semi-established, and established young entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurship continuum may not be a smooth process. It will kick some out, provide boosts to others as they leapfrog stages, and will be a difficult journey for most as they progress along. The ecosystem must take into account the sometimes disparate and fragmented government, civil society and private sector services to support young entrepreneurs. We must define the ecosystem, align the players, and get this ecosystem to work. Government is committed in supporting and growing youth entrepreneurship in South Africa. We believe that entrepreneurship provides a viable entry point for economic participation for our young people. Using the lessons learned, both good and bad, we are committed to aligning government support programs and incentives towards developing the youth entrepreneurship pipeline. We do this because we want to drive South Africa's competitiveness through youth entrepreneurship. Our economy desperately needs the talent and innovation that young entrepreneurs bring to the table. So we need leadership, and more specifically, entrepreneurial leadership. The Constitution puts power into the hands of our people. We have to take leadership and control to further our dreams. Power to the people means empowering power to be able to, power to the people means empowering people to be able to take charge of their own destinies in the spaces that they occupy. Good leadership is about taking responsibility. We exercise good leadership by taking responsibility to make sure that things go right in our own lives, in our own communities, in our own organizations, and therefore in our own country and in our own world. Bad leadership is the abdication of this responsibility. We outsource this responsibility to people who may disappoint us. It is time that we, as this millennial generation, took this responsibility. It is time that we truly exercise people's power in our communities, in our companies, in our organizations, and everywhere where we exist, as in particular as young people. As young people, we must be at the forefront of pushing for positive social change. And to do this, it requires leadership. And the time to wait is no more. So my challenge to you, do not outsource your leadership responsibility. Don't crawl through the desert in search of the mirage of leadership. Don't drink the sand. You must lead. Thank you.